Hello, hello. All right. How are we all doing today? I am looking over very quickly in the chat section, and if somebody can just let me know if you can hear me. Hi, Zion. Hi, Vanessa. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Jonathan. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I'm very excited. Happy New Year, everyone. Oh my goodness, last time we did this, I think it was back in September, and doesn't that feel like a blink of an eye? Where did the time go, right? I'm so very excited. If someone can just let me know, is the volume good? Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see me? Beautiful. Thanks, Gilbert. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. All right. You know how much I love technology, also. I wanted to make sure that everyone can hear and see me. If you've never attended one of these before, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. My name is Amanda Augustine, and I'm the resident career expert for Top Resume, as well as our sister brands, Top Interview and Top CV. To give you a little background on me, I am a self-proclaimed certified job search geek. I am actually a certified professional resume writer and career coach. I've been working in this field for about 15 years now. And I'm so excited to get the opportunity to have these types of events, because really what I love doing more than anything else is giving practical, tactical job search advice. And frankly, you shouldn't know any of this information if you are not a certified professional resume writer or a recruiter and you work in this space day in and day out. So that's really what we're here to discuss. I am going to be sharing a presentation. It's lengthy, and my goal is to get through as much of it as humanly possible, because I did pack a lot into this deck, and I'm hoping we can get to all of it. So here goes. Hey, Lisa, so great to see you. I am going to minimize that sucker, and I am going to turn the screen share on. Bear with me. I want to do it for a certain application. Okay. And we're going to go into present mode now, because I haven't. Let's present. Where are we? Slideshow. There we go. All right. Hello. We're going to skip over a little of this because I want to make sure we get to everything today. This is actually an important screen because I do want you to take down at least one of the URLs you see here. Anybody who attends an event that I hold gets access to this one link that gives you special discounted pricing should you decide to have your resume professionally rewritten by Top Resume. So if you go to topresume.com/jobsearchamanda, you can both request a free resume review, but if you do decide you want to work with a professional resume writer, you can get a discount on that. So definitely a link to hold on to and to share with your friends and family. As I mentioned, I am the resident career expert for Top Resume, as well as our sister brands, Top Interview and Top CV. And really, I'm totally excited today to talk about the new resume rules for the new year. So what in the world does that mean? Well, before we get going, one thing I do want to show, and let's just hide this little bar so you guys don't see that either, is this is not the only chance I'll be talking this week, and you can get to ask your questions. So if you've attended one of these before, you know I like to talk. I want to make sure that you get your questions answered. Our moderator, Jenna, my right-hand woman, she is going to be answering as many questions and providing links while I'm talking, but also there's a second chance to interact with me this week. This Friday, I am going to be sitting down with Andrew Seaman from LinkedIn for his Get Hired live show. And so that's at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time this Friday, the 22nd. So you can go to the bit.ly link that I put at the top of this page, and you can say to turn reminders on, and it will basically send you a notification so you can watch that event as well as ask your questions through the stream, similar to what we'll be doing here today. As I mentioned, I do represent Top Resume, and we're the largest resume writing service in the world. So again, if you decide after you read all this, you're like, maybe I don't want to have to do all this by myself. Maybe I want an expert to do this. Here's where you can go and also get some free expert advice, have somebody critique your resume for free. It's completely confidential. Or if you want to work with a professional writer, you can then also employ our services. One thing I didn't mention, but I typically do at the beginning of any presentation I give, is a little caveat that I am born and raised Northeast. I do talk rather quickly, and according to my mother, I do not enunciate. So if you don't understand something I'm saying, if I'm talking too quickly, please put that in the chat. Jenna knows to basically text me and ping me and tell me if I need to slow down or repeat something. And I'm also hoping to get to some of that during the Q&A. Now, I always like to show the slide at the beginning of a presentation because I think it's such a great visual representation of the entire job search process. Today, we're only focusing on one piece of that prep phase, which is that resume, a little bit of the cover letter, but really we're focusing on resume today. But I always think it's nice anytime we have one of these presentations for you to take a good look at how do you break down the job search into a more manageable set of steps, because it is an overwhelming process for sure. So just something to keep in mind. Right now, we're just talking about one little step within that preparation phase to ultimately set you up for a successful job search. Now, here's what I promised when we put out this webinar. I'm going to break the resume down by section. I'm going to highlight the skills that employers are valuing most given the job market today. I'm going to go over some tips to make sure that your resume is what we call ATS friendly. It's going to pass through that initial electronic screen with flying colors. And then talk about some of the mistakes that you can avoid that we know employers just hate. I'm going to focus a lot on the top three. I'm going to incorporate the mistakes. I'm going to incorporate the ATS stuff kind of throughout as well, because I think it's really important. But just to give you an idea, this is all we're trying to accomplish today. And it's quite meaty for an hour webinar where I also want to save time for Q&A. So just keep that in mind. I may breeze over certain areas. If it's something you want more detail in or on, please put your questions in the feed and I will try and address as many as possible. And I know Jenna is also going to be working really hard to make that happen as well. All right, so what in the world has changed? What hasn't changed about our worlds these days, right? But let's talk specifically about the job market. What has changed? All right, well, good news for anybody who has experienced some unemployment thanks to COVID, or maybe it was even before COVID. Top Resume did a study back in September, and we found that actually lengthy employment gaps don't carry the same stigma they did, you know, say a year or two ago. That the overwhelming majority of employers and recruiters said, it's not a red flag. Everybody's in the same boat. We're not as worried about that. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Don't fixate on that. Yes, you can work by showing what have you been doing during this gap in employment, you know, taking courses, active in networking, taking on pro bono work, whatever it might be. Sure, you can incorporate that in to show what you've been doing with your time. You can 100% play with how am I representing the dates of the start and end dates of each job I've held to minimize that perceived gap. That's definitely something you can do. Just be consistent with that. But don't fixate on it. Focus really on, well, how do I format and present and reframe my experience for the goal I'm going after today? How do I demonstrate my value to a prospective employer? That is a lot more important than trying to figure out how to make this gap look smaller. Jobs are becoming increasingly location agnostic. What does this mean? A lot of companies are still operating in a fully virtual environment. They haven't gone back to their offices, their physical offices. Not everyone, I'm well aware of that. But when we asked employers, well, what are the new questions you're asking during the interview process? The most common question we saw was some form of, are you okay working from home? How have you, changed the way you work in order to better balance work and life when you're working from home? Are you willing to? Are you able to? Do you have the proper setup? It was all about, hey, there's a chance you could be remote for quite a while or a home-based opportunity. Does that work for you? So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that you want to demonstrate those skills. You want to demonstrate if you are willing and capable of working remotely, either for the short term or for forever, frankly. And I will go into a slide soon that talks a little bit more about certain tips around that. Certain skills are considered more valuable, and they happen to be a lot of the softer skills. So we'll look at that list and see what that is. And this did come from, again, another study that Top Resume did, where we asked employers what skills have become more important. given what's gone on in the past year. And I'll talk a little bit about, well, how in the world do you incorporate those skills when we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of a resume. Career transitions are on the rise. I would not be surprised if a large chunk of the people viewing this webinar today are either forced to make some sort of industry change, or everything that's happened has kind of been that wake-up call that's made you realize, I want to go in a different direction with my career. We're seeing that from many different angles, many different reasons and factors are coming into play, but we're seeing a lot of people having to look outside their career path at this point and then moving towards either a different industry or a completely different role. And that means that there's a lot of maneuvering, reframing, repositioning, translating that needs to go on in your resume to make sure that you are still showing employers that you're a good fit for the role that they're trying to fill. I'm actually getting ready to ask some questions to recruiters and hiring managers specifically around that. I don't have that data today, but I'm hoping to share that with you in an upcoming webinar, so stay tuned on that. And then we've also found that employers are looking for more points to connect. What does that mean? Well, they're looking at your cover letters more frequently than they did in the past. They actually said they're more likely to read them now than before the pandemic. They're taking note of what you're putting in that interview thank you note, if you're sending that interview thank you note. They're doing all of this interviewing through video for the most part and over the phone, so they really are grasping, looking for other points, other points of context just to get a better sense of who you are and would you be a good fit for this culture. Something I didn't put on this slide in particular because it really is more about the employers than how it will affect you, but we're also seeing the types of benefits that employers are offering. They're starting to change because, frankly, a stock snack room or a stipend or a voucher for your commuting costs doesn't carry as much weight if you're working remotely. So we are starting to see more money towards childcare. We're seeing money or equipment for setting up a home office. We're seeing voucher stipends, discounted or free memberships to gyms and exercise equipment and classes and stuff like that. And also a little bit of that even with mental health services, support services. So when you're evaluating jobs, keep in mind that there are some other benefits that are suddenly being dangled in front of candidates. And you want to keep in mind what's important to you and what would you consider valuable. So if and when you are ready to negotiate an offer, you know what might also be on the table or what you could ask for, even if they didn't advertise it. So I think those are all important things to kind of keep in mind. I did mention that a couple of these bullet points, I did want to go into a little greater detail as to what does that mean for your resume. So let's go into that now. Okay, so as I mentioned, many jobs are becoming more and more location agnostic. What does that mean? Well, your opportunities, the net's wider. There are more opportunities available. Now I get it, some industries are really shrunk right now, some aren't hiring, but what I'm trying to say is you don't necessarily have to look for jobs that are in and around a certain mile radius of where you live now, because so many positions are now in this virtual environment where location doesn't matter. So it does open you up to some other opportunities. Even other industries that may have not been very prevalent in your current area, you may now have an opportunity to pursue those. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're looking at job listings, definitely look for information that's indicating whether or not they want you to be virtual. Sometimes it just matters, you know, what coast you're on or what time zone you're on. They care about that and keeping everybody, you know, on the same time zone. It depends on who you're going to be dealing with. Look and see what information they're providing when it comes to location, and don't be afraid to also ask about that when you start talking to somebody. To make sure that you are the most attractive you can be for the roles where location isn't a factor, these are the things you want to keep in mind. If you traveled extensively for work in the past, if you telecommuted in the past, had a home-based job, however you want to phrase that, you want to make sure you're emphasizing that experience throughout your resume or wherever it makes sense. So whether you're putting it in the job title and putting, you know, virtual or home-based, whatever, same thing for how you're listing location. And when it comes to roles and responsibilities, think about, and achievements, think about how can you work that in. Was part of a 5-person virtual team responsible for X, Y, and Z. achieved blank sales quota while traveling 75% of the year in 2018 and 2019, whatever it may be. Also, if you had to very suddenly switch to remote work, when everything got locked down because of COVID, you want to make sure you're incorporating those details. Think about, how did you suddenly adapt your work practices? How did you suddenly make something that really worked offline work online, work in a virtual environment? What tools did you have to adopt? What skills have you built? How did you help roll with the punches, frankly? Wherever you can emphasize or highlight that type of information, that's good. You also want to think about, what are those skills that employers look for in remote workers? And it's not surprising that a lot of the things you're seeing here will also be reflected in some of those softer skills that employers value more right now. So think about the hard skills really has to do with, what tools are you now using in order to do your business, whether it's the communication tools, the platforms, so that you can do project management or collaborate with your coworkers. You want to make sure you're incorporating a list of those on your resume. And when it comes to soft skills, again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, so I don't really want to dwell on it here, but I'm going to talk about how you can incorporate soft skills into your resume in a really meaningful way, instead of just saying, I'm disciplined, because obviously I could say I'm anything. I'm a unicorn, doesn't mean I am. So we're going to talk about that. And then also, you want to show them that you're set up for success. I don't think you necessarily have to put on your resume that you have a dedicated workspace or fast and reliable internet connection, but I think you could incorporate a line of this information into your cover letter, knowing that employers are more likely to read these days. Just a line that says, I previously worked from home, or I have been for X amount of time, or whatever it might be, or, I am set up at home to work productively and blah, 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 something along those lines. This should not take up a paragraph of your cover letter. It should be a one-liner. But again, it's just these little things that you're incorporating into that application that send the signals that you would be a very good remote worker, that you can work from home. I actually presented these in my last webinar, but I wanted to bring them up again because I think it's important, because this is something that is favored, considered more important in this new job market, these types of soft skills. Is there anything on here that's groundbreaking? Have any of these skills not been useful in the past? I don't think so, but they have increased importance now. They've taken on greater importance. And so I will talk about how we can incorporate these into your resume, but this is a list to keep in mind. And adaptability and flexibility, that is popping up everywhere because everyone's still rolling with the punches. Things are still changing. And so whenever you can provide examples of how you've had to adapt or be flexible to continue to meet your targets, to solve problems, that's really important, because that shows that you have the potential to kind of do whatever there needs to be done in order to get the job done. So nothing on here groundbreaking, but just make a mental note of these skills, because we're going to talk about how you can incorporate these and other soft skills into your resume further in this presentation. All right, what hasn't changed? Okay, we went over what has changed. What hasn't changed? There are still many things that have not changed when it comes to the resume, and that's a good thing. We already know about these. There's content about them available. So one of the first things I like to bring up, well, writing a resume is still part art and part science, right? What do I mean by that? Well, when you're crafting your resume, you need to keep two key audiences in mind, or stakeholders, reviewers, however you want to, whatever you want to call it. You need to keep in mind that most resumes are passing through an applicant tracking system, a piece of software which is sifting through, parsing your information, and basically providing your application with a score. And the resumes or the applications that have the higher scores, they're the ones that the recruiters and the employers are going to look at. The ones with the lower scores, they're really not going to pay attention to. Does the applicant tracking system, do the hiring bots actually reject your application? Not exactly. They're still in there. It's just they're assigning a numerical value to your application. And if you're not in that higher chunk, the human being is never going to look at that lower half. You're never going to get considered. So that's important to keep in mind. And then when it comes to the art, we're really talking about, well, how are you presenting that information in a way where it's impressing and grabbing the attention of that reviewer so that you make it through that initial review and they really further consider your application. And ultimately, we hope, call you and then begin the interview process. What else hasn't changed? Your resume is still a marketing document. And I say this in probably every presentation I give, and I will continue saying it because I think it's really important. Your resume is not meant to be a transcript that has every detail of every role that you've ever held. It is a marketing document. You should consider it or regard it as a marketing document, which means you get to curate the information. You get to pick and choose what you want to emphasize and what you want to downplay or omit entirely. I'm not saying make intentional employment gaps on your resume, but you can decide how much information you're going to provide on each role based on how relevant is it to your current job goal. So really, it's very important to do your research, identify the types of roles you're pursuing, get that as clear as you can in your head, and then leverage that information to reevaluate your resume and determine, is it truly positioned for the role that I'm pursuing today? Am I customizing each application? And by that, I mean slight tweaks to the wording, maybe a reordering of some bullet points in order to best suit or reflect what I'm seeing in a particular job listing before I submit. Am I making sure that instead of just talking about my responsibilities, that I'm really demonstrating the value I bring to the table? Am I proving that I have the qualifications? Anyone can say they're great at sales. Anyone can say they're great at customer service, but you have to provide actual proof of those claims. And that's what's truly going to impress an employer. Everyone with me? I know I'm talking a little fast, but there's a lot to get through, and I want to make sure I give you as much information as humanly possible before we get into that Q&A part of this webinar. Okay, so resume basics. I'm hoping to do a little bit of a rapid fire where we go through all of these different components. These are the high level things you should know about resumes. Ready? Okay, page length. Typically 1 to 2 pages. And I put a big asterisk here because ideally most resumes are 2 pages long. In fact, there was a study done not that long ago, a couple of years at this point, that found that recruiters were 2.3 times more likely to prefer a 2-page resume over a 1-page resume, regardless of your job level. And I really like to bring this up because so many people think they must get their resume down to 1 page, and that is 100% untrue. Recruiters, employers, hiring professionals in general really value and tend to prioritize resumes that have a strong career narrative, that provide proof points of the value that that candidate can bring, and have a really nice visual balance. It's easy to quickly scan the document and understand why this person is qualified for the role that they're applying for. In order to accomplish all 3 of those goals, you need some space. You need to provide a professional summary. You're going to have a core competencies or areas of expertise section. You're going to outline a bit more of your experience than simply just bullet points in some instances. So you're going to need some more space, and that's okay. So don't feel that you must keep yourself to 1 page. In fact, it's the opposite. Now, for those of you who have very extensive work history and are saying, well, 2 pages is impossible, Amanda, what are you thinking? We're going to get into some of the other rules that kind of go along with resumes, or I'll call them guidelines, because of course everything has a little flexibility to it. But yes, ideally, you're only really supplying 2 pages unless you are submitting a job to the US federal government or you are in the world of academia or science. And those are the exceptions I put at the bottom of the slide, because both of those types of resumes tend to follow a very specific different format that tends to be lengthier than your average professional resume. The other thing I also want to put out here is that if we have anybody in the audience that's new to the job market, say you graduated in the last year or so, don't take this slide to mean you must have a 2-page resume. Now it's more, take this more to say, if I have enough meat, like real information that's worth sharing and that will help advance my position, I don't have to feel obligated to stick to 1 page. If I have enough information to warrant a 2nd page, I'm allowed to have a 2-page resume now. And that's the difference. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that your average recent college grad is now graduating with more qualifications. They're doing co-ops, internships, You know, they're taking on freelance work. They're doing special projects. They're more actively involved well, maybe that's a stretch, but in general, they tend to have more information than just their newly minted diploma to brag about on their resume. So yeah, if you have that type of information, 100% you're allowed to go to a second page. This is not, if you're at that one page that, you know, I want you doing Courier New double space to hit a certain page length. If you have enough information to really only warrant one page, keep it to one page. But for the average professional, 5+ years of experience, chances are you probably have enough meat to go to a second page. Time frame. All right. Of course, there are caveats to everything, but typically I'm talking about the last 10 to 15 years of work experience. Now, if you worked for a long time and went to college later in life, I am not saying you can only show what's happened since college, but we're normally talking about what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years. And 15 years is really that cutoff point for your resume. This is why it's easier for those with really lengthy work experience to trim their resume down to 2 pages, because we're really only focusing on the most recent 15 years of your experience. That doesn't mean it doesn't count. That doesn't mean that it's not important, but frankly, it takes on less importance, less relevance when it's further back in your history, because recruiters, employers are always thinking about, well, it's great you did that 25 years ago, but what have you done most recently that's applicable and relevant to what I'm trying to hire today? So there are a couple different ways that you can treat that experience that goes after that 15-year cutoff. You can either provide a career note, which is a short blurb that just summarizes at a very high level some of your roles. This works really well if, say, you worked with some really well-known, well-respected clients or brands. If there's a name you're trying to drop, a career note is probably the way to go, because you can incorporate in this short little blurb, includes experience working on X, Y, and Z with ABC clients or something along those lines, so you can still get those names in there. For other people, really, you just want to incorporate those previous roles to show some career progression, to show that, yeah, I didn't just graduate college and become a VP or even a director. There were some roles that led up to that, and so I want to give you a sense of what that career progression looked like, just so you have a sense. I know it's hard to visualize this, so I do want to provide you with some examples. So this right here is the career note, and this one's super short. It's just letting you know some of the titles and the company names, and then always details available upon request, or additional details available upon request, something along those lines. But again, if you had some specific client names, brand names that you're trying to name drop because they're very important and highly regarded in your industry or in your field, this is a way that you can incorporate it in if it falls outside that 15-year window. Notice that on this resume, and again, I'm looking at this now, what year are we at? This was written a year or so ago. So just to keep in mind, we would cut off the dates for any of the education that was outside that 15-year window. So you can see that this candidate's bachelor's degree doesn't have a year. At this point, we'd also take off the year for the experience at DePaul, where they got the MA in Human Resource Management. This is what an earlier career history one would look like. And honestly, for this individual, because this is the same person, just I did it both ways so you could take a look at it, I would probably go with this version, because there wasn't a lot to name drop. This just shows, look, here's my career progression at various organizations leading up into my more extensive experience that I'm going to detail for you. So something to keep in mind. All right, font type and font sizes. This list is not exhaustive, so keep that in mind. These are the ones that we tend to favor at Top Resume. Doesn't mean it's the only ones out there. Really, the important thing to keep in mind is, does it show up well, both in print as well as online? I think we're moving more and more as a field towards what we call sans serif fonts, which basically means Calibri Light, Arial, Verdana, I can never say this, whatever number 9 is, Trebuchet MS, Arial, Narrow. Those are all ones that are considered sans serif. Times New Roman, Cambria, Garamond, Book, Antiqua. I always consider those more for a very traditional field, a very traditional organization, more that bricks and mortar feel, that's when I tend to go towards that font look. But these are all considered completely acceptable. I know a lot of people have opinions about Times New Roman. I don't personally use it because I think it's just so common, but you find that a lot. Really, the idea is stick to something that's not custom, because you have no idea whoever you send your resume to, what system they're using, how up to date it is, and you want to make sure that your resume's content does not get scrambled because you use some fancy font that not everybody's system can read today. When it comes to font sizes, this is a guideline. It's typically anywhere from 10 to 12 for the body, and then 14 to 16 points for headers or subheadings. Maybe the name at the top is slightly bigger. It's all within a little bit of these. And really, it's going to come down to what font type you use, because some fonts are naturally smaller and kind of shrunk versus others. So you need to go a little larger on some to make it as readable as one of the other fonts. So really, it's give it a whirl and check and see what you like. And if you're going to work with a writer and you have a preference, let them know up front so that they're more likely to deliver, because all these are considered acceptable. So if there's one on here you really like it and you'd prefer to see your resume in, go for it. Also, if you want to get fancy, you can use up to 2 font types. Use one for your main headers and then use a different one for the body of your content. That's the typical rule of thumb. Don't go any crazier than that. Again, we want it to have a nice streamlined look for consistency purposes. We want it to be visually appealing, visually balanced when someone is quickly glancing at your resume. Moving on. Okay, and I'm just letting you all know I'm glancing down my phone really quickly. Jenna, just let me know if I need to back up or if the pace seems to be okay. In terms of margins, there's no real set rule. I would just say don't go any smaller than ½ an inch. I mean, some people kind of shrink it to 0.4 if you're really tight and you're trying to make it work. But again, the smaller your margins are, that means the more content you're trying to fit on a single page, which means the harder it is to read it because there's just more there to consume. And so keep that in mind. If you're really trying to shrink down those margins and you're shrinking the font size, if it's starting to look like an eye chart, then I think you need to reevaluate what information you're providing. And if you were on one page, definitely go to a second page. If you're already at 2 pages, it is a further review of, well, what am I adding that's not as relevant? Is there a more succinct way to say it? You'll find that if you work with a professional resume writer, we don't write in full sentences. That's very, and it drives people nuts, like, oh my gosh, they missed the word. They missed the word. We do that purposely. The goal of resume writing is to get the point across as succinctly as humanly possible while still sounding professional. And in that vein, small little filler words are omitted so that it's more of a phrase. And that's something to keep in mind, both if you're writing your own or if you're reviewing something that was professionally written for you. That's very common. So keep that in mind. File type. Lots and lots of conversation about file type. When in doubt, you want to go with a Word document. PDF, I know everyone says, oh, but PDFs. Here's the deal, and this comes back to when we're talking about, is your resume ATS friendly? Will it pass through that electronic screen at the beginning of the application process? Not all applicant tracking systems are able to read PDF documents. So if you are applying for a job and they make you upload your resume as a file, look and see if it specifically states what types of documents it accepts. If it has PDF listed there, then go ahead, upload a PDF version of your resume. That's fine. We know that that preserves the formatting and the design of your resume best. However, if it does not spell it out and say that PDF is okay, if you're just emailing it to someone, always send them a Word document version, because you know they're more likely to be able to read it. If they have to upload into the system, it's the most parsable version out there that gives you some formatting, what's the right word? Command. Not the best word, but a plain text file is probably the best, most ATS friendly, but you have zero control over the format. You can't bold anything. You can't underline. You can't really add bullet points or anything like that. You can't do a lot of stuff. Word document allows you to do that while still making it readable by applicant tracking systems. So that's important to keep in mind. All right. Color, images, columns. I really like to talk about this now because in the past it was kind of like, oh, don't do any of this. And now the rules are changing, but it's still within reason because it really has to do with, okay, is it still going to be able to pass through an applicant tracking screen and be okay? Is it going to distract or detract from the most important information? These are the questions you want to ask yourself. So when it comes to color, be careful what you're doing. You can do it, but you have to be strategic. You're typically only going with one color. Either you're doing an accent that's very pale and maybe it's color, the background blocks to highlight certain pieces of information, or you're using a darker color for your headers or maybe the company names, the titles, those sorts of things, to basically have it pop off and just, add a little oomph to your resume. This is a perfectly acceptable way to incorporate color into your resume and still make your resume parsable, still make it be able to go through an applicant tracking system. If you're going to choose a color, I tend to veer towards the dark blues, the dark greens, something that is going to contrast very well on a white document, right? You don't want to go with a pale yellow color or something that's very close to white unless it's just simply a background color for popping out a box, because you want to make sure that there's a strong contrast between it and the overwhelming white part of your resume. Does that make sense? When it comes to images, graphs, and headshots, in general, embedded images, anything you're copying and pasting in there is not ATS friendly. It's not going to appear. It's as if that information was not on your resume when you uploaded it for the application. A good test, if you Control or Command all, copy everything that's on your resume and paste it into a plain text file, anything that's suddenly missing or skewed or scrambled or just completely in the wrong place, that there's an issue and it's not going to be ATS friendly. That's what happens with images. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, I wanted to call out this image that's on the right-hand side of this screen. This is a screen grab from a resume that actually somebody asked me to look at just last week. And I wanted to call out because I'm seeing this more and more frequently, especially the skills section where there's these bunch of dots that are saying, oh, look, I'm a 4 out of 4 in process design, or I'm a 3 out of 4 in project management. There's no standard system. There's no universal system. This doesn't mean anything to anybody. When I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, you think you're great at change management, but I have no sense of, are you proficient? Are you an expert level? This doesn't really tell me, the reader, anything. It's pretty, but it doesn't tell me anything. And so it's not necessarily helping me make a decision about you as a candidate. So this is something that I'd say, please don't do it. It doesn't work. You'd be much better off using that section to add other skills that are incredibly important and that are routinely popping up in the job descriptions that interest you, to ensure that your resume is considered ATS friendly and that it's considered a good fit for those types of roles. In addition, just be careful. I couldn't tell because I was looking, I didn't have the Word doc version of this, but where you see this section with the system admin, if these are images and it's not actually written in text for all these things, there's a chance that none of that would actually pop up when the resume was going through an applicant tracking system. So be really careful with stuff like that. Again, if you do a Control All or Command All and paste your resume's content into a plain text document, you'll know one way or another if the information is coming through and coming through accurately. Also, if you request a free resume review from Top Resume, and you can do it from that link I mentioned, topresume.com/jobsearchamanda, we're going to let you know. We're going to say, hey, this is what the system, the parsing technology, thinks are your top skills. This is what it thinks your name is, your most recent title, et cetera, and so forth. If that information is not accurate and you look at that and you're like, what the heck? That means that it's not ATS friendly, that you have to make some adjustments to the format in order for it to work. And the last thing I want to bring up, because I'm seeing this especially if you go on Canva and try and use their resume templates, their templates aren't ATS friendly, unfortunately. And they're also all, for the most part, one page, and we know that recruiters would prefer to see 2 pages. So be mindful of that. You are not supposed to have a headshot on a US resume. Employers don't want to open themselves up to accusations of potential discrimination when it comes to reviewing a resume and a candidate. So don't include it unless you're in the entertainment business. And if you are, it's going to be in a complete headshot that's with your resume, not on your resume. There are other countries outside the US that still require a headshot, such as the UAE. The US does not. Neither does the UK, by the way. And a lot of people think that CVs automatically require a headshot. It's not true. It really depends on what country you're applying for. So that's something to keep in mind. We actually have some really great content on the rules and how they vary from country to country if you decide you're going to apply to jobs outside the US. So definitely something to keep in mind. I do realize we have some viewers here who are not in the US or looking for jobs in the US. And so I do want to make sure that I'm keeping that in mind and that there are some other general rules out there. And we do have content to go deeper into those differences. But most of what I'm talking about today is universal. So just keep that in mind. Columns. Everyone's all about the columns. Columns, not a bad thing. It must be on the left-hand side of your document. So we call it the left-hand rail, or the left-hand column. The example I have below here, this is a left-hand column. There's a header, it has this information, and then there's a skinny column on the left-hand side that has information, and then the main body of the resume to the right of that. This is perfectly acceptable and works and will go through an applicant tracking system with flying colors. If it was reversed, and I don't have an example of that because we don't do that because it doesn't work. For whatever reason, and I wish I understood the technology behind it, but I don't. All I know and what I can tell you is that if your resume has a column on the right-hand side, it does not get parsed and read properly by the applicant tracking system, so please don't do that. This format is fine using a left-hand column. This is a format that we use at Top Resume, but something to keep in mind is when you do this, you typically then go, the second page doesn't have that column anymore. It goes to one full page, like other, more traditional resume formats, because there's just nothing else to put in that left-hand column that makes sense. So just something to keep in mind. All right, how are we doing? I'm gonna check my time. Oh, we're flying by. Okay. Resume standard sections. There's a lot here. This is pretty standard. I'm only going to go into detail about a couple of these areas. Contact information is pretty self-explanatory. Use a professional looking email address. Use your cell phone for the phone. Only one. Make sure it's one that you're going to answer. You control what the voicemail message sounds like, that kind of stuff. The only other thing I'd point out about contact information is figure out how you want to represent your name. What first name are you using professionally? And whatever you decide to use, just make sure it's consistent on your LinkedIn profile, on business cards if you get them for your job search efforts. Whatever it might be, just make sure that you're using it consistently. You don't have to be Michael if you like to be called Mike. Go by Mike. Go by whatever you want to be. Just make sure it's consistent. These are the two areas I want to go a little deeper in because I think they're the areas that people have the most questions about. Okay, professional summary. Professional summary replaces what is traditionally known as a resume objective. And when you're putting this together, which could be a short list of bullets, or more often than not, it's a blurb, a paragraph. Anywhere from 3 to 6 lines is typically what you see these days. These are the questions you're trying to answer in that short paragraph. Why am I qualified for the job I'm targeting? What about my experience, my education, my skills make me a good candidate for this type of role? And how have I used these abilities in the past to create results or provide value? So again, it's all about setting the stage for the rest of the document and showing them up front why they should be considering you for this role. Whenever you're writing something in a resume, kind of keep in the back of your mind that every line you're writing, the recruiter's going, so what? So what? So what? You want to get it down to where it makes sense and the information you're providing is all relevant and ties back to basically supporting the case that you're a good fit for this role. These are examples, and I know they're not all completely spaced out. Jenna, I don't know if you can, it's one of the links I provided you with where it provides samples. You can look at these more closely. I'm not going to sit here and dwell on these, but these were just examples at various levels in a person's career as to what a professional summary might look like or how it might start out. So again, I mean, it really is all that. And you'll notice that I'm not using first person. I'm not using nouns for he, she, stuff like that. I'm talking what's known as absent or silent first person. And, you know, again, not complete sentences. That's okay. That's expected. Writing a resume is different than writing a paper, writing an article. It's a very different type of writing. When it comes to work experience or your work history, these are the things you want to remember. Focus on the value you provide, not just the responsibilities. A lot of people have what's known as a kind of a task-oriented resume or a doer resume, where it's, I did this, I did that, I was responsible for this, I was responsible for that. That's great. That's just telling you what the job description was. You want to go beyond that. So if it's not your first job out of school, or, you know, it's not a role that you held for 6 months, that sort of thing. If it's a role that you held and is truly relevant to the work you're doing now, and it wasn't kind of that entry level, getting your feet wet kind of job, you want to put a short paragraph that explains your responsibilities. What were you responsible for? What were you tasked with doing? And that's a short little setting the stage for that role. The meat, the most important part, are the bullet points that you bring in. So always remember that bullet points tend to equal bragging points. And those bullet points are supposed to then say, well, based on my responsibilities, this is what I accomplished. Here's how I provided value. Here's how I leveraged my skill sets to make things happen, to solve challenges, to increase brand awareness, to, you know, increase customer engagement, whatever it is. This is where you offer the proof of those qualifications. So I like to talk a lot about results by action as a format to follow. You start with, what did you do? Increased revenue by X%, and then action, by doing X, Y, and Z, by leveraging this, by creating that, whatever it is. Start with the big bang headliner. What was the results, the output, the value, and then how did you get there? And that's a great way to start showing some of those softer skills as well as your harder skills or technical skills. Always quantify whenever possible. And if you're listening to this and saying, yeah, but I don't have a job like that. I can't quantify anything. I don't have massive results to, you know, I was waiting tables. None of this applies to me. That's perfectly fine. Then I want you to look at the last bullet point that's here. You still want to ask yourself, well, what proves that I'm good at what I do? Your bullet point should focus on any type of example that demonstrates I was good at what I did. They liked me there. They would have kept me on, that sort of thing. So it could be you got, and I always like to use this kind of the waiter or waitress kind of thing as an example, but you got the best tables, the busiest, you know, shifts to work. You were asked to train or mentor new hires. If it was a seasonal job, you were asked back for multiple seasons. You got employee of the month. Anything that demonstrates you were good at what you did. Also ask yourself, if I missed a couple days of work, what balls would get dropped? What wouldn't happen if I wasn't there? That's probably going to indicate some information that you should be adding in, because that's where you were providing some real value. So something to keep in mind. This is a really nice kind of framework. You can use this for interviews. It's actually the STAR method you're more likely to associate with interview skills and practicing for interviews, but it also works really well, particularly when you're trying to demonstrate a softer skill, such as adaptability and flexibility, or communication, or any of those other skills that employers have stated are increasingly important given the job market and the world we live in today. When you're looking at those bullet points, think about how can you use this model to provide an anecdote that demonstrates that you leverage the skill to do something great. So you use this information, and again, I would start by just kind of brainstorming out something and then figuring out how could you change it into a bullet point on your resume. But what's a situation or task that either you were assigned or you raised your hand to take on to solve a problem, meet a goal, whatever it could be. What actions did you take? What did you do? And then what were the results or the outcome of those actions? When you're putting this into a bullet form, you basically start with the bottom bullet point here and work your way up in terms of how you describe it. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of information on this. There's a really cool article I wrote on the importance of potential and how much employers, you know, in a previous study said that a candidate's potential is by far the most important thing they care about, but how in the world do you demonstrate you have potential? Well, potential really has to do with, how creative of a problem solver are you? How willing are you to kind of learn and grow to fit, to meet the needs of what's going on? That really applies here too. And I detail out really like step by step how you can take this model and leverage it for both your resume as well as during the interview process. You can take that advice and apply it straight to your resume for any of these soft skills that I mentioned earlier. These are additional components that not every resume is going to have, but you might have, and it's going to depend on your type of role. So career highlights you typically see on somebody who's a very seasoned professional or an executive level, where some really important information might be in the middle to the bottom of their second page, but they want to make sure there's a mention of it on that first page, since that top third of your resume is really that snapshot that the reader looks at and is going to set the stage and hopefully catch their eyes so they're more willing to read the rest. I'll show you an example of that soon so that you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. But it's basically calling out maybe some bullet points that are further in the resume, or rewording, reworking, and highlighting something that will also be brought up and elaborated on further in the resume. Volunteer experience, this may have its own component, or it may be worked into your work experience, particularly if you've been doing some of this to fill that employment gap. Technical skills, most people do have technical skills incorporated into their resume. It's just going to depend on where you put them. For some people, that's going to be in that areas of expertise or core competency section. If you are a technology professional, you will have an entire section dedicated to every different type of language that you speak, that you're able to code in, and you're going to go much deeper on that than the average person. For the average professional who has a few years of experience or more, there's typically a section towards the bottom that goes into tech, and it's going to be all the different platforms you're well versed in. If you're not sure what to include, always go back to what are the job descriptions you're looking at asking for, which skills are being repeatedly mentioned. If it's being repeatedly mentioned, it means you should be incorporating it into your resume. Language skills, and if you're going to put language skills, you can put native speaker, proficient, expert, beginner. You do want to provide some sort of level, not the dots like we saw on that example for other skills. That doesn't help anybody. You want to actually give them kind of a context as to how well versed are you in that foreign language. And frankly, I would not put it on my resume if I'm not comfortable answering questions in that language, either in person or via email. So keep that in mind. If you're like, well, I took Spanish 101 and I know 3 phrases, I wouldn't put that on your resume. But if you would feel comfortable, if you had to leverage it as part of the interview process in some way, shape, or form, then you can put it on and you can decide what level you're at. And there is a lot of information online to help you determine what are some of those common designations in terms of proficiency. Professional affiliations, we tend to see that on any mid-level to senior level. If you're part of a number of groups that are relevant to your work, you want to add those in. And then publications and presentations tends to be for those who are in academia or the scientific community, where they've written lots of papers, they've given lots of presentations. That's honestly why their resumes tend to be longer, because they could have pages of publications and presentations as part of their resume. Okay, I know this is the stuff everyone wants to see, and just remember, you will get a recording of this, so you will be able to look at these. You can pause and look a little bit more closely, but here's an example. I don't know if you can tell on the screen, but actually Lewis's name, that line up to the left of his name, and all the subheads and the company names are all in actually like a pine green color. So there was a little color added here, but nothing crazy. It just gives you a sense this resume is highly parsable, meaning that it will sail through with flying colors if Lewis applied to a job that uses an ATS system as part of its recruitment software process. But this gives you a sense. You can see the technology at the bottom, the education. He has, an earlier career experience blur. It's much smaller, just as additional experience. But this just gives you a sense of what it could look like. And this is just one example. They can look very different. And I know it's hard to see, or at least on my screen, it's hard to see. I don't know if it's the same for you, but the top of Jane Alvarez's resume on the first page, that section that contains her name, her credentials, as well as her professional title. That whole section is actually on a pale blue background, and then there's a dark blue used for certain headers. Again, this is a way that you can incorporate color, but you're not going crazy. It makes it stand out a little bit. It looks a little bit more modern, but it's still very much a good functioning resume. It's easy for someone to read it. There's a balance to the white space. So this is a way that you can efficiently use it. Also notice some of the other design details that are done here. Again, bullet points are used for the bragging points, but also for those bullet points, part of the lines are actually bolded to, again, even more dramatically draw the reader's eye to the meat, the most important information. And notice that Janie is a native Spanish speaker and she's fluent in English. So that's at the bottom left of hers. For most people, if you are not fresh out of school, your education is on the bottom of the second page of your resume. But if you're using this 2-column approach for your first page, then some of this information gets ported into this left-hand rail as opposed to going onto the second page. And then this is, again, a more traditional one, but I wanted to show you this because this is a more senior level professional where we really had to edit down. This person has many years of experience, but we were still able to fit it on 2 neat pages. And this one still works well. And this gives you a sense of selected achievements or career highlights. That's what those 4 bullets are. Like, yes, there is that professional summary, those core competencies or areas of expertise, but we also have the selected achievements because we do want to call attention to items that are going to fall into the second page because they're considered most important and some of the best bragging material that Jake had. Very quickly, because I think I've for the most part gone through all of these pieces. When we're talking about the applicant tracking systems, here are a few things to keep in mind. When in doubt, stick to a Word document. We already talked about that. Avoid using the header and footer sections of a Word document. I emphasize this a lot because if you are using Word, there is that header and footer. I would minimize those as much as possible. The information that you're seeing at the top or in the bottom of the resume, you don't want your contact information, your name, any of that identifying information to be in an actual header. It can actually get scrambled when it's going through an applicant tracking system. Instead, don't use the header or footer sections, just put the information at the top of your resume. If you use the footer for page 1 of 2, that's fine. That's not a big deal. But when it comes to really important information that you want to make sure it gets parsed correctly, you don't want it in a header or footer section because it could get all scrambled or just completely not read. I'm always going to say stick to a simple, clean resume design. What does that mean? It means not getting too fancy or too creative because employers, recruiters are all accustomed to looking for certain pieces of information in relatively similar spots on every resume. If you start messing with it, it's not that, oh, they're going to love to hunt for that information because your resume is so fresh. They're going to say, I've got 300 applications to go through and I'm not going to sit there and dig for this person's information. So you want to be very cautious about how fancy you get. Make sure you're not using a custom font, a custom bullet point, anything like that. Be very consistent with how you format company names, start and end dates. And that's, how are you representing months? How are you representing years? Are you adding months at all? Those sorts of things. Applicant tracking systems favor resumes with a very clear hierarchy to the information that's included in them. And you can kind of see that when you're looking at these resume examples. There's a very clear hierarchy to the information. It's very obvious where there are certain sections. That makes it very easy for the system to parse that type of resume. And then we talk about this so much in so many different webinars, but optimizing or customizing your resume with relevant keywords. If you're not sure what words you should be incorporating into your resume, take 3 to 5 job descriptions that all describe the type of role that you're both interested in and you feel you're qualified to perform. And then take that content and put it all together in one doc or one big chunk and put it through a text analyzer. So I have no affiliation with this company, but I've used online-utility.org. I found that one and thought it was good. But you can go through that and it will actually analyze and tell you what terms or phrases are most frequently used in a block of text. look for what that says, look at those results, and if you possess those skills, have done those skills, have that type of experience, then those are the terms and variations of those terms that you want to incorporate throughout your resume, so that you're sending all the right signals to the technology saying, no, I'm the right type of person for this role. You should score me high, so that somebody actually reads my application. I'm throwing this out here now because we're going to go into Q&A, and I will stay on for longer. Anyone who's been on these, I always go over, but I'm always happy to stay on and answer more questions. But if we don't get to it, there's another chance to ask me questions live this coming Friday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Just go to that bit.ly link up there and we can chat further. And then I'm just going to pop this up. So again, I'm going to get out of screen. We're going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to you guys. All right. Yeah, Barry, JobScan is good to look at the resume and the job description. But the one thing I would say about JobScan is that it also gets a little too technical when it comes to the soft skills. And so the score is going to be lower than it truly is. Don't be obsessed with, oh, well, I didn't mention proactive 3 times in my resume, and so it's giving me a low score. I don't believe in. I think it's kind of a little overly sensitive, and so take it with a grain of salt. I'm looking at my phone because I just heard a beep, and I know that's probably Jenna telling me what I should be doing or giving you all, so you can see. Okay. Bolded okay. Okay, we can hear me. Questions. Where can I find the best where can I find the questions? Jenna, thank you so much for adding that link. I am now just trying to there's a lot. So should we include a summary section or write a clean cover letter separately? There's always going to be a professional summary at the top of your resume. That's what takes the place of the resume objective. But yes, you should have a cover letter as a separate document. And if you're emailing your application, I would use the body of the email for your cover letter and attach the document as your resume. Oh, okay. I am pulling up, I believe Jenna gathered some of the questions for me, so bear with me 1 second. I'm going to grab them. Okay, here we go. I think you can all see me right now. Oh, here we go. Great. Okay, some questions. What solution do you have if your successes are not directly measurable? I'm a graphic designer, but I have no way to prove my packaging design directly affected product sales, etc. Yeah, that's definitely a challenging one. If you can't actually point to that information, definitely, if you're still working at that company or you have friends that are still working at the company, don't be afraid to actually reach out to them and say, do you know what happened or how sales changed, that sort of thing. 100% put that out there because you might be able to get some numbers. But I would focus more on what was the goal of the packaging design. Did you eliminate XY details or emphasize this in order to, what was the aim of the packaging? Because that's the best you can go with. And the only other thing I think you can do is maybe talk about if you started with one product and then they said, this is great, let's do it to all of them or something like that. That demonstrates that whatever you were doing was effective, even if you don't have a number to point to, so that you can talk about that. You can also talk about, did you deliver it on time, ahead of schedule, and that sort of thing. So for anybody who can't really pull numbers, just think of things in terms of faster, better, more seamless, more effective. I'm trying to think of some other words to use there, but that's the idea. Just think in terms of how is it better, faster, more efficient in that sense, even if you can't provide direct numbers associated with your bullet points. And I will say a graphic designer is a different it has its kind of different set of rules, because you're going to want to make sure in your contact information you have a link to your online portfolio, that it has a lot more to do with the types of stuff you handled and a visual representation of your work. So while you still want your resume not to be overly designed, your online portfolio becomes really, really important, because you want to send them there. You want them to look at that, because that's going to be a much better visual representation of what you have to offer. I would also say that don't be afraid to put some hyperlinks in your resume that are directing them to particular pieces on your site to look at a case study or a sample of the certain packaging or that sort of thing. So from that perspective, that's actually more important. How often should you follow up after a video interview? I had one and he told me he liked what he heard. I sent a thank you email and got a response saying he would circle back once he got through the process. I followed up 2 weeks later, but the email went unanswered. So should I email him again or forget it? I see the job continually being posted. My typical rule of thumb is that, okay, you followed up 2 weeks later. I would follow up once a week or once every other week for 4 more times, or until the person says, stop messaging me. And the other thing I would add is that the next time you're in that interview situation, one of your last questions should always be, may I follow up with you? How? Via email, call you up sort of situation, and also time frame. What's your schedule for hiring, finalizing this hire? What, something along those lines, because that's going to help you understand how frequently you should follow up and kind of what you can say. And so I would always try, and if I'm following up, it might be just to check on the process, but ideally, if you're keeping tabs on the company, if you think of another piece of information that you didn't supply that could help you and advance your position, you're always looking to offer a little bit, another nugget of information, or you see that they did something and it popped up in the news, congratulate them for that. Or you read a great article that based on your small talk conversation with that hiring manager, they'd be into as well. Use those little opportunities to connect with that individual as you're following up. It makes you more memorable. So keep that stuff in mind. What's the best way to show non-traditional education, such as online classes from Allison, Hubspot, or other specific classes and not a degree? I would put that in a section called Education and Professional Development. I would start with my education, but I would also have a section just for continued education or professional development, and I would list the courses and the name of the course, the site that I took it on, and the year that I did it. And if there's a bunch that are all from the same site, you might all put them together. But that's a great way to kind of put that stuff. What do you think of Frank Gothic font? It's not personally my favorite, but there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, there is some subjectiveness to fonts. I will say that I always tend to favor Calibri Light. I think anyone who's worked with me, I'm like, let's do Calibri Light, because I just like it. And you'll find that different writers have different preferences. I think it's more about, is it a standard font? Is it something that, the average Word document is going to be able to open, regardless of what version it is? And does it make it easy to read the information? If it's not making it easy to quickly glance and read the information, then you shouldn't. For us creatives, what is the solution balance to making a design resume that's actually read properly by the auto systems? Yeah. Okay, so I think I addressed this a little bit. Save your creativity for your online website, for your online portfolio. Really go nuts on there. Show your personality, get it out there, show them what you're capable of. But your resume, while you can add a little color, you can use the left-hand bar if you want, you can't go crazy with the design of that, because frankly, it's just not readable through the technology. So, and I've actually had, heads of product and stuff like that come up to me and say, please tell them not to do that. Please tell them to give me a traditional resume, because I can't read it. It doesn't work. I have to hunt for information. Really show off your design chops on your online portfolio through the social media channels that you're using to share your work, those types of spaces. You can even add media to your LinkedIn profile to show off different things that you've been working on. Really use that to show it off. The resume is still, to an extent, a cut and dried document, and you got to kind of respect the guidelines. Even though they're flexible, you got to kind of respect what those guidelines are, because it won't benefit you to break them. Clarify, please. My professional name is my full name, but I prefer my nickname in use. Should I then use my nickname on my resume? if your nickname, so for instance, we have a friend who we call Champs. Her first name's Catherine. That's the nickname we use at work. That I would not put on the resume. That I would not put on the LinkedIn profile. But if we're talking about Bill versus William, or Charlie versus Charlotte, 100% use the name that you use for work. That's perfectly fine. In full disclosure, the name that I use is actually not my legal name anymore. I still go by my maiden name for work because that's where I established myself. And so I didn't want to go through the process of representing myself to the world with my married name. And I've been married for over 7 years at this point, but I never actually changed that for my professional life. And so again, it's what's the name that makes the most sense. Also, I know some people, if they have a name that's very hard to pronounce, their first name, they often use whatever their nickname is that's easier for the average person to say, just because they don't want to have to like go through, let me explain how to pronounce my name yet again to an audience that doesn't get it. That is completely up to you. That for honestly, it's really your preference in those situations. It's just the more important thing to keep in mind is that you want it to be consistent throughout. Whatever documents, however you're branding yourself to the world as a professional and or a job seeker, just keep it consistent. How to write the internship experiences in my resume. Is it the same way as the work experiences, since the internship duration is so short? Yes, they're going to be in there. If you graduated, say 5 years ago, and the internships were while you were in college, it's probably time to drop them. If it was for a really great company and that's why you're having trouble letting it go, you might even just put a career note that previous internships include experience at X, Y, and Z companies. That's a way to do it. But for your average internship, we actually have a great article on this that shows an example. Jenna, I don't know if you can pull it for that person or if you already did, but we do have examples of that. You're not necessarily going to have a big paragraph and then bullet points. You may have 2 to 3 bullet points, and it's going to focus more on what were you exposed to, what types of work were you doing. Again, any emphasis on, was asked to work full time after a temporary role, that sort of thing. That might be what you're adding, but there's a general understanding with an internship that you're just not going to have as much detail. You may have worked on one project for the 3 months or 6 months you worked there, and that's perfectly fine. That's just what you're going to detail. Just take the one thing I want to show you what I learned and what skills I obtained while I worked there. And if I don't feel like I created all these great skills, it's more of what was I exposed to demonstrate that I now have a better understanding of this industry or this line of work. I was recently told by another resume professional expert that paragraphs should not be used. Just use bullet points or 1 to 2 lines of text. All right, I get where they're going with that, but my concern is that if you just use bullet points, if it's an endless list of bullet points, if you end up putting, 7 bullet points in a row, it has the same effect as a really dense paragraph of text where the eyes just glaze over it. You don't really pick out the information and understand it. If everything's bulleted, everything's important, which means nothing is really being called out as the most important thing to read. So I would respectfully disagree with that professional. And yes, we're all entitled to our own opinions, but from my work experience, assuming this is a role that you've held for a while and it's not just a role where there's not a lot of information to provide, if you only work there for a short period of time, or this role is not really relevant to what you're looking to do next, yeah, you may just have a couple bullet points, 100%. You may have a couple lines and a bullet point, 100%. But it is a media role where you were there for a number of years and there's some good information to share. I would keep to a short paragraph, and by that I mean no more than 3 to 5 lines that's summarizing your role and responsibilities, and then the bullet points are calling out the most important pieces of information, those bragging points that demonstrate the value you provided to your employer. Can you slim back that first paragraph a little bit? Sure, it's going to depend on what's important. I tend to keep them on the shorter side personally, but by shorter side, I'm saying 3 full lines, not a sentence. Any tips on what to do with going back and forth between school and working jobs unrelated to the industry that you're applying for? This is a really great question, and this happens a lot where maybe some older experience is more relevant, or it's kind of all over the place. If you recently got your degree, even if you've been working for a while, you might still work in that degree into your professional summary, but you may still put that education at the bottom of your resume, or use the resume format that has that left-hand column to call it out. And then you can split your work experience into two sections. You can have relevant work experience, relevant sales experience, recent sales experience, something like that. And then you can have additional experience. This actually works really well for those that were, say, holding a job. They were working retail while they went to school to make some money, and then they had a real internship that was focused on what they want to do, and that's kind of the most important. You'll start with that information, what's most relevant and most recent, and then have another section that shows, yeah, but I was working all the time, and I want you to be aware that I was working all the time. The jobs that aren't relevant to your current role, you're just going to minimize how much information you provide, and really think back to, in each of those, what skills did I leverage that could be applied and are important to the job I'm looking to do today? And that's probably the information I want to emphasize the most. Can we hyperlink the text so that they can see examples? I don't mean a portfolio, but actual examples of social media accounts. Yes, you can. Be aware that if it's parsed, they might lose what the text is. So if you said, so if you wrote LinkedIn profile and then you hyperlinked to your LinkedIn profile, which is very common for, say, your contact information section, when the resume is parsed, the URL will remain. They'll still see the URL for your LinkedIn profile, but the actual word where you said, oh, this is my LinkedIn profile, that will disappear. It's the text will be replaced by the URL. So just be careful when you're hyperlinking what you label that. I wouldn't make that, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't bullet or hyperlink my whole bullet that said increased brand awareness by the blah, blah, blah campaign and hyperlink to that campaign, because you'd lose that line of text. Instead, I'd write that line of text and put in parentheses example or see details or something along that line, and that's what you hyperlink. I hope that makes sense. 100% you can hyperlink to information. Just don't, if you're writing an article, you might say, and here are 7 great tips for how you do X, Y, and Z, and you would hyperlink that whole thing. You wouldn't want to do that on a resume because you'd lose that sentence. So that's what I want to emphasize there. But I do believe in hyperlinking, but being very strategic about what you hyperlink so that it's not, be very strategic. They're not going to check out everything you hyperlink. So you don't want to send them to too many different places. Be very thoughtful about where you send them and how often you're sending them to new information off your resume. Do you repeat the skills and tasks in your resume in a later role if already mentioned in a previous role? Is this redundant or not necessary? Like for receptionist duties and tasks. I personally, if it's something that's in every role, I emphasize it more in the more recent roles and then make a much briefer note about it in older roles because it's been there. Some people do it the opposite way, and frankly, you can do it either. You can either really detail out that type of information in the original roles and then just kind of briefly note it in the more recent roles since you already did that. And often that works out well, actually. I'm going to change my stance on that because you want to focus on any of the kind of newer skill sets. I think the most important, you do not have to repeat it. You definitely don't want to repeat it verbatim in every single role. You want to look for, and something that my friend Danny Rubin used to always say when it came to a role such as like administrative or something like that, it's look for the drama. How do you describe the drama? There are stressful moments in those types of roles, and you want to make them feel, look how I was able to handle that. How many calls were you handling? How many clients? What was going on? That's the type of information you want to add it, and that's kind of where the bullet points come into play for those types of roles. Let's see, I'm about 19 minutes over. Oh, here's another one. I have a section of my resume of all temporary positions that I've held in the past 2 years while unemployed, whether relevant to the career hunt or not. Totally get it. Yes, a lot of temp positions are going on. You can either put it as one header, like consider it one role and say, temporary role. And if they're all kind of similar or have a theme to them, you might just say temporary administrative assistant, whatever it might be, and then say you took on various temporary positions at organizations, including X, Y, and Z, doing X, Y, and Z type of work. And then, again, that's what, a line or two. And then there's maybe a bullet or two if there's anything really meaty to talk about there. And so you are giving an indication that you were doing something meaningful during that time, that you weren't just, as I mentioned on the skim last week, you weren't just binge watching Bridgerton, right? You were holding work. You're just not going to give it as much resume real estate because you only have 2 pages to work with. And if it's not as relevant, you don't have to, elaborate on that information. How far back do you go in employment history if in the same field, and what point is education no longer important as it was 20 years ago? So rule of thumb is you don't go back more than 15 years, though there is kind of a little bit more flexibility if you are a C-suite professional, say you're a CEO or president or something along those lines, you may end up going a little farther back. But again, the farther back you go, the less details you share. The most detail is on the most recent work, and you kind of decrease it as you're going back. But 15 years is that rule of thumb. Give them the most recent 15 years. Your education is still important and should still be listed, even if you earned that degree 20 plus years ago. You just don't put the education, or you don't put the year you earned that degree anymore. So you 100% still add that in. It's not assumed that you went to school. You definitely want to let them know that you went to school or got these certifications that are relevant to your work today. You just don't put the dates anymore. And that, in part, is due to we're trying to remove any intentional or unintentional age bias that may occur. Please address age, since several of us are attending are over 40 or even close to retirement and suddenly find themselves laid off. I know it's an awful situation. I totally get it. We do have a really great article on age proofing your resume. Here's the deal. Don't focus so much on the age, focus on the skills you have and the value you can provide, the experience, the knowledge you have. That is still always in the market. I would also, focus on the resources, and by resources, I mean the job boards and things of that nature that cater to that audience. AARP has an amazing job board. Anybody posting a job on AARP knows that the applicants are going to be, 40 something or older, right? I can't remember exactly what their cutoff is there, but I know it's a little looser. They definitely are in the mid 40s, are still on that site as well. So 100%, if you're near retirement or you retired and you had to come back out, those types of sites, think about that. They already are expecting that age group. So, there's less of that bias that you have to overcome. Other things to keep in mind. You want to show them that you've kept up with technology. If you haven't, then I would take steps to look at the job descriptions that interest you, that are relevant to your skill set, and look at what pieces of technology are they expecting you to understand and be well versed in. And you want to take steps to getting a better understanding of those so that you can speak to that on your resume and in the interview phase. Don't forget about your network. I don't care if you feel that everybody's retiring around you. Think about who you mentored, who you managed, who now may be in a position to bring you on as a consultant or in a different capacity, or just frankly may know of other leads in the area. Not all jobs are published, so that's something to keep in mind. What are other things? You are cutting your resume back to those that 2-page space. You're removing the dates from more than 15 years ago. You want to emphasize the most recent work that was important. And I know this is silly, but also make sure you have an up-to-date email address. If it's still Optimum Online or or Comcast or something like that, just get yourself a free Gmail account. I know it sounds silly, but there is this assumption that if you're on a much older kind of email system, it means that you aren't tech savvy or you haven't kept up with technology. Whether that's true or not, it is an assumption that's made by many. And so just get rid of that potential right there. Okay, I'm going to go on for a couple more minutes, and then unfortunately I'm going to have to cut off, but let me look. Please, we did that one. How would you recommend including freelance work where there may be many clients or jobs within a similar role. Similar to what I was talking about with the temporary work, if you're a freelancer, you can put freelance, blah, blah, whatever you do. And then your short paragraph talks about the type of work and the types of clients you take on. And then your bullet points are being leveraged to call attention to specific accomplishments or results. And it could be from a variety of clients. And so instead of sectioning each one of these out, because your resume is going to get huge, right? You're going to make it all packaged into basically one role, and then you're going to leverage the bullet points under that job description, under that work experience to call attention to individual projects that are noteworthy. And if you want, and I have seen it also done, and I've done this for someone in the past, where at the beginning of each of those bullets, it actually like states the client and then talks about the work. But that's more of a preference, and it depends on how noteworthy are those clients, and you know, is there a reason to highlight it in that fashion? What might be the best way to describe the stay-at-home for the COVID cutbacks? What might be the best way to describe the stay-at-home for the COVID cutback? So if you were laid, I'm assuming that means if you were laid off because of COVID, you don't have to really describe it. Frankly, if you're unemployed right now, most people assume it has something to do with COVID. I know that this is the only time in history that I've ever been in the job force that it's kind of assumed and everyone kind of gets a free pass on that. I think it's more important to talk about, well, what have you been doing since that cutback? And I'm not too sure if that means cutback is in, you're working less hours because they have less hours to give you, or, you know, you're on furlough, or if you were laid off, you know, entirely. But in any of those circumstances, you don't really have to go into detail on that. It's much more important just to talk about, well, while you were there, what were you doing that was great? Because the one universal understanding when it comes to layoffs is that they're not performance-based. If you're laid off, it's due to external circumstances that are outside your control as the employee, and it has no reflection on your personal performance. Now, do we know that some, you know, people in their own heads go, oh, well, maybe they'll think, I understand that, but that's the definition of a layoff, is that it's not related to your performance. It's because the company had to make cuts. And so I wouldn't get caught up on it, just like I wouldn't get caught up over an employment gap, because the research has shown that employers are less concerned about those things right now because they get that so many people are in the exact same boat. So I have 4 or 5 graduate degrees. My goodness, you are very accomplished and I am not. Can I assume they know I have a BA to save space? Yeah, that's funny. One, if all the graduate degrees are relevant, then yeah, you want to include them. You know, part of me is saying, oh, you got to have the BA, because if they're parsing the information and they don't see it, it might, you know, if the technology doesn't see it, it could cause an issue. I don't have a solid answer on that. I mean, my gut would be I'd find a way to add it, you know, in some way, shape, or form, and make it very brief. You don't have to go into anything besides the degree, the institution, and depending on when it was achieved, the year. At this, assuming you have this many degrees, I'm assuming maybe it was done in the past. I would actually, what I would do is for any of the earlier degrees or less relevant degrees at this point, I would make sure it's only taking up a line of space. Degree, institution, maybe city and state, and in parentheses years, assuming it's within the 15-year window. Also, I don't know what your work is, but typically someone who has 4 to 5 graduate degrees, I would assume you might be in an area of science, medicine, dentistry, or academia. And if that is the case, you actually have a lot more room, because you would be using what's known as an academic resume or academic CV. And in those instances, you get more than 2 pages. It's expected that your resume will be longer for reasons like this, for the fact that you have so much education, you have those sorts of things. So I'm not exactly sure of your circumstance, but that's something to keep in mind. Jenna, I'm looking quickly at Slack. Can you let me know, did I hit all the ones? I know there's a million questions. I get that I haven't gotten all of them, folks, and I totally understand that. But Jenna had highlighted some of them for me. Did I hit the majority of them? because we are about at time. Let me see. I'm going back to look at the broadcast. How are we doing? All right, guys, I know there was so much. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. I know there's a lot of information. I was trying to give you absolutely everything in a very short period of time, and I knew it was going to be a real stretch, but I wanted to really deliver on the promise that we provided in the webinar description. So please definitely shoot us a note, particularly if there is another topic, or if you'd want me to drill down on one aspect of this entire presentation and make it its own webinar. We'd like to do these at least on a quarterly basis. And so let me know if there's something that you're really interested in to help me identify what we should be talking about next. But at this point, I want to thank everybody for attending. Please definitely swing by the LinkedIn Get Hired talk on Friday and drop in some more questions. And I'll also look through, again, the chat and see if there's some other stuff here. There will be a follow-up email with not just a recording of this webinar, but it's also going to link to an article. And so I will try and answer some more of these questions where I can, or at least take you to where you can find the information on those. But I want to thank everyone again. My name is Amanda Augustine. I'm the resident career expert for Top Resume. And I want to thank you for hanging in with me for well over an hour and talking all things resume. I want to wish you the best of luck on your job search. And, you can always find me on social if you have any questions. I will do my best to try and get back to you or point you in the right direction. Take care and have a great rest of your day, everyone.